So, a little bit about me. Live in London, work for Cisco, like cats, hate Marmite, and I'm going to talk fast. We might not have time for questions at the end, but if we don't, you can grab me after the talk anyway. There is going to be maths in this talk. I do love maths. People talk about elegant code. You look at elegant code and it's beautiful, it's simplistic, and it flows together and it forms really nice architecture. Maths is the epitome of that. You know, you take a theorem and you prove something else on top of that and something else on top of that, and you end up with something beautiful. I'm not going to dig into it, and hopefully I won't make you cry with the maths. What we are going to do instead is we're going to look at the basic terminology, the concepts of encryption, just to make sure everyone's up to speed. We're all using the same language. We'll overview the difference between symmetric and asymmetric encryption, again, just in case anyone's not familiar with that. Then we're going to dive into RSA, one of the most common public key cryptography systems at the moment. After that, bit of maths, theory of elliptic curves, before diving into how we use those for cryptography. Finally, we'll have a look at RSA versus ECC, which one is better, if there is one, which one's safer, which one's more secure, and what you should be using. Finally, we'll start wrapping up by looking at what ECC is being used for at the moment, where it's going to be used in the future, and what the sort of landscape of cryptography is going to look like over the next couple of years. I'm not going to give you an in-depth university-level guide to all of this. This is a crash course. This is going to be terms, ideas that you can then take, Google, start reading on documents and understand what's in them. It's a springboard. I'm not going to give you a history lesson of any cryptography. If any of you came to my modern cryptography talk last year, there was a bit of history in that. That's on Parlays. Go and have a look at that. No proofs. Proofs are tediously dull to anyone that doesn't enjoy mathematics, and even some of the ones that do. And also, we're not going to do key exchange protocols. These are a part of how the internet works and how these systems work. I'll touch on them, but I'm not going to cover them in any great depth. And of course, the usual disclaimer, I work for Cisco. This is my talk. None of the views represent those of Cisco. They are all my own. So if I offend you, it's me. Kicking off with cryptography refresh, we have to start with one all hail, because this is Claude Shannon. He's the godfather of modern information theory. He came up with a lot of cryptography ideas. He worked with Alan Turing on a lot of the ideas of computability. He really is the godfather of modern cryptography. He created this thing in the World War, the one-time cryptography pad, which is still to this day completely uncrackable. And it's a pad of codes, and you each have one of the pads, and provided you tear them off and use them in the right way, no one can crack the code ever, even if they get hold of one of the pads, because the information in there isn't enough to just to use that to crack the system. He's also famous for this little saying, the enemy knows the system, which basically means that, you know, for a lot of these things, the mathematical theory is out there. OpenSSL, for example, the source code is there for you to go and look at. We would be in serious trouble if just by looking at the source code of OpenSSL, you could work out how to decrypt your private messages. You're ignoring the fact that OpenSSL has bugs in it. You know, if it was perfectly secure, looking at the source code should not allow you to compromise the system in any way. So first couple of words, we're going to start using plain text. This is just what it sounds like. It's the plain text. It's what you write to each other every day in emails. It's standard English or French or whatever your national language is. What we do is we encrypt it with a cipher. A cipher is a function, and it mangles the text to produce cipher text. Decryption is obviously the reverse of all of this. And some ciphers use one key, symmetric ciphers. Public keys use two, obviously, one to lock it and one to unlock it, as we'll see shortly. Can't go much further without touching on this, because I'm not really going to cover it in much detail later in the talk. Cryptanalysis. It's used to breach cryptographic systems. There's various ways of doing it, and what type of cryptanalysis it is depends on, you know, computational resources. Are you requiring a Cray supercomputer to crack this cryptography system? If you don't have a Cray, then it takes 20 years on a desktop. It's not really an efficient crypto analysis method. The degree of information exposed is another way of classifying cryptographic analysis. You know, some systems are quite leaky. They leak a lot of information about what's going on whilst they're performing the encryption or decryption. And the amount of information they leak allows for different types of cryptanalysis to be performed on the system. Also, we can look at how far in you get. You know, you might be able to get, say, 50% of a key used for encryption, which can be useful, but probably isn't. So we talk about how far you can get into the system, and how many levels can you get down and pull information out. But you can't underestimate the stupidity of people. You can't underestimate spies, either governmental or corporate spies. You know, corporate espionage is something that's growing year on year. Look at the recent newspaper stories about America accusing China of hacking into various businesses to get competitive advantages. And traitors, you know, people in your own company who you've either upset somehow or maligned or something like that, and they're now there and they're able to do a lot of damage because they're already inside your network. And of course, in the social engineering, you know, we've all seen the films like Hackers, where someone rings up and a poor secretary and says, "Hi, can you read me the mobile number on the back of your modem?" And then they use that to break into the system. It sounds crazy and stupid, but really, social engineering is possibly one of the most exploited areas when it comes to cryptanalysis. What can we do to fend this off, though? So one thing that we use is a term called diffusion, which is how similar the original message is to the encrypted one. The more similarity there is, the fewer encrypted messages you need before you can start building up a statistical image and just reverse engineer everything just based on statistics. You know, the letter E is one of the most common letters in the English alphabet. So if there's not much difference in E and whatever letter it gets encrypted to, that's giving away a lot of information about your system that can be used to crack it. Another one is confusion, which is the complexity relationship between the key you're using to encrypt and the actual message. The reasons why confusion is really important are somewhat buried in the mathematics. But generally, the idea is, again, that, you know, a public key is available publicly. So if there's too much information in the public key and how it relates to the messages it's encrypting, then that's a weak spot and it can be exploited. This is Kirchhoff's principle. Kirchhoff, again, is another one of these famous cryptographers. And what he did was he re-spoke Claude Shannon's saying of "the enemy knows the system" into something a bit more sort of tight and technical. A crypto system should be secure even if everything about the system is known except the keys. So OpenSL, again, is a good example of this. You can look at the source code, and provided that you can't crack a system based on just looking at the source code, then we're achieving Kirchhoff's principle. But be careful. Crypto ninjas can't herd cats, by which we mean that you are probably not ever going to be well enough versed as developers to go out and write your own cryptographic function and do it in a secure and safe manner. And I say this because there are so many systems out there that have been tested, have been subject to a lot of analysis, that you would be foolish to try and write your own. You are asking for a world of pain somewhere down the line, probably when you get hacked. Going back to ciphers. Ciphers are very many different forms. This is kind of a class diagram, just sort of to give you an idea of how they're made up. You've got the original rotor machines in the middle. These are like the Enigma machine that we used during the war. They've got dials in them, and every time you press a button, the dials twist again and turn the permutation so that it really mixes up the message. They're mechanical. They do have their faults, and of course, as soon as the Britons got hold of one of the Enigma machines, we managed to crack the entire war message system, and that was it for the Germans. Once we started introducing sort of computers, we started going back to the classical ciphers, which are substitution. So that's really simple, like ROT13. You rotate all the letters in the alphabet by 13, so A becomes M, and so on. Obviously, that's a really easy one to to crack, but there are similar ones that are more complex that are still in use at the moment. Transposition is where you just mix everything up in a slightly different way to substitution. But what we're really interested in is the modern ones. So we've got asymmetric and symmetric. Symmetric, which I've labeled wrongly here as public key, has got stream and block types. So these, again, if you come across these terms, stream, it means that it's just getting a constant stream of information, encrypting as it goes. Whereas blocks, it takes a chunk, does the block, waits till it's got the next chunk and sends them on that way. Asymmetric is what we're going to be focusing on, obviously. I've mentioned things like standard libraries and standard encryption so far. This is the great XKCD explaining how standards proliferate. Anyone that's used standards will know how quickly another standard has been added that's better than the previous standard. You do need to keep up to date on them a bit. There's a lot of resources on the web. I'll have some links later that show you where you can go to find out about the standards for security. But since we're talking about them here, and we're going to be talking about them later, they come from trusted authorities, maybe somewhat less trusted in the last year or so. People like NIST, who are sort of the National Institute of Science and Technology in America. They work very closely with the NSA when it comes to things like security. We've got NCIA in Europe, and locally we've got GCHQ, HMG, local government stuff. They all either have their own standard that they ask you to use, or they just agree on one of the other standards that someone else has published. A standard consists of what the cipher is, the protocols that are used in that, whether you need sort of blocks or streams, key size, minimum key sizes, maximum key sizes, random number generators, all the little bits that come together to form the crypto system is what generally gets classified as a standard. And like I said, we use these because it allows people to focus their research and investigation on them, and allows us to make sure that the standards are actually as secure as we hope they are. They also allow hardware manufacturers, people like produce routers and other network devices. They also then get a chance to implement these algorithms directly on their hardware or very efficiently in software. These curves and other RSA standards, there are very fast implementations and there are not so fast implementations. So, having the standard allows people to fix on some good implementations. So let's just quickly review what the difference between symmetric and asymmetric keys are. We've got Alice and Bob, our usual cryptographic people. No malicious Mallory in this example. And in a symmetric one, both sides have got a key that's the same. And say Alice wants to send a message to Bob. What she does is she locks it with her key, sends it over to him, and he unlocks it, and that's the message read. Really simple symmetric encryption. This is AES, DES, all the sort of ones that you'll have read about for Blowfish, Twofish, really, really well-known algorithms. Asymmetric is a little different. So say Alice, again, wants to send her message to Bob, but she doesn't want anyone else to be able to read it. What can you do? Well, what if Alice puts her own padlock on the letter and sends it over to Bob like that? Bob can't unlock it because he's not got the same key for Alice's green lock. So instead he puts his own blue lock on the letter and sends it back. Alice then unlocks her green key and sends it back to Bob, who unlocks it and reads the message. So at no point in time did you have to share any information with anyone else. You just encrypted the message, you sent it, they did something to it, sent it back, you unlocked it, sent it to them, they unlocked it, done. No information needed to be shared. This isn't how RSA works. RSA works by sharing the public key. So in fact, what would happen was Alice would lock it with Bob's padlock and just send it straight to him, and he'd unlock it with his special key. These types of tricks are called trapdoor functions. The idea is it's very easy to calculate going in one direction, i.e. encryption, but very hard to calculate how to do the other, the decryption. They're the basis of modern cryptography. There's a couple that we are using, and as we'll see later, they're not perfect trapdoor functions, and this leaves us room for problems in the future, especially as computing power catches up. Now, a little detour. The mountains of complexity. I am not going to give you a tutorial about Turing machines. Basically, a Turing machine is a cassette player, and it reads using a magnetic head, and it reads from the tape, and the tape might say, move 2 spaces to the right and write something. And you do that, and then you go, okay, well, I'm in this position now, what do I do next? And you look at your table of rules, and it says, do this next. And you just follow the rules. That's basically what Turing machine is. The reason why I bring it up is because we talk about decision problems in some mathematics, and a formal system is basically, mathematics is a formal system. It's something where we've tied down a lot of the fluffiness that goes around with describing things in human language. And we talk about a decision problem, and we ask whether it's either true or false. So given any 2 integers, x and y, is x divided by y mod 2 0? In other words, is x even? That's a question you answer true or false. Is the real part of any non-trivial 0 the Riemann zeta function or half? It sounds like an odd one. Actually, it does have a connection because the Riemann zeta function is all about finding prime numbers, which is what RSA algorithms use. And does any algorithm finish within a fixed amount of time? Again, this is the classic halting problem. We don't know the answer. So what we do is we try and classify these problems into P or NP. P means it can be solved in pretty much linear time. Most of the problems we deal with are P problems, sort a list, do this, filter, map, reduce. They're problems in P. A problem is in NP if it can be verified the solution can be verified in polynomial time. So the traveling salesman problem is a classic NP problem. You've got a salesman who has to visit so many cities, and you have to work out what the shortest route is. Calculating that route is a really hard problem. Checking that the answer you've been given is the shortest route is dead easy. And then things get harder. NP complete are the hardest problems we have. They're harder than any other problem in NP. And we have a way of working out whether a problem is NP or NP complete. The advantage of being in NP complete means it's some of the hardest problems we know, and it means that using it as a basis for these mathematical challenges that we'll see in a minute is really good. Now, this is just a sort of slight aside, because there's a lot of mathematical debate whether P is the same, it encloses NP, or whether they're completely separate. If P does contain NP, then that means we will at some point find an algorithm that will solve all our hardest problems in linear time, or polynomial time, which would be absolutely fantastic. There's not a lot of evidence to say that's what we're going to find, though. That's why interesting things like quantum computing are so strong, because they offer a new improved model of computing to try and crack these ultra-hard problems. So all that out of the way now, let's have a look at RSA. Everyone knows RSA is fundamental to HTTPS, SSL. You'll see it on all the certificates if people have ever bought one from VeriSign or anything like that. It's pretty much using RSA. And the problem that they're using underneath is what's called the integer factorization problem, which is given some big number, find the prime numbers that multiply up together to give that number. It sounds like it's easy, but obviously once you get into digits with a million digits in the value, then it takes a while to search through all of those. We don't know if it's in co-NP, and hence if it's not NP complete, we really don't think it is, which means that at some point we probably are going to find a really fast way of cracking this. And a factor is, like I said, it's just the numbers that divide into whatever you're trying to get. So 20, you can divide it by 1, 2, 5, and 10. A prime number, of course, is just a natural number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. No floating points, no minus numbers, no anything like that. It should have no number which divides it and leaves a whole number except itself and 1. And we say two numbers are co-prime if the greatest common divisor in them is 1. So the greatest common divisor between 15 and 10 is 5, because you can divide 15 by 5, you can divide 10 by 5, and so on. And as you can see at the bottom, 17 and 10 are co-prime because they don't have a number that divides them both that's bigger than 1. So what the integer factorization problem says is that for any number you choose, you can express it as the product or multiplication of a prime number to some power. So 15 you can break down as 5 to the power 1 times 3 to the power 1, whereas 20 is 5 times 2 squared. So you can break any number down, any natural number down can be broken down like this. So the problem is, given that number, what are the factors? There's this totative and Euler's totient, which are ways of calculating how many divisors there are for a given number, how many factors there are. So let's start working through RSA. We choose two prime numbers, P and Q, and we multiply them together to give this third one, N. And we calculate the totient function that skipped over quite briefly in the last slide. And this is what it works out to be. It's P minus 1 divided by Q minus 1. It's quite simple. And then we choose a random number between 1 and this P minus 1 divided by Q minus 1. And we also have this extra criterion that this random number we've chosen must be co-prime with the totient of the big number, n. And then we work out d. And the reason why we do this is because, as you can see here, the private keys and the public key is actually a pair. So they both start with e, which is this magic random number we've picked in the middle, just here. And then they've either got n or d, depending on whether it's the public key or the private key. So let's use this now. Let's start with the message, m. And let's convert it into an integer. So let's assume that we just take every letter and replace it by its ASCII number. Then we need to manipulate that so that it lies between this big number that we've got from multiplying our two primes together on the previous slide. And we do that by using a padding protocol. So if it's too short, we can add stuff on the end. And we need to do it in a special way, because if we just add zeros, then obviously that gives you a lot of repeated data to then crack. And so you need to make sure that padding is sort of contains random content. And then we just generate the ciphertext by doing the calculation of raising this number that we've got from converting this string into a number, raise it to e, which is part of our key, and n, we take the modulo of n, again, it's part of our key, and that gives us c. And we send c over the internet. And Bob gets c and just basically reverses it, because he's got the other half of information that makes this simple. He's got d and n. So one of you's got e and n for encrypting, the other one's got d and n, and the numbers literally just drop out. Which is what's really nice about both this system and EC, is that the encryption and decryption processes are actually really simple to understand in terms of the process. Actually working out the mathematics to do it and coding it up is harder. But the actual idea is kind of nice and simple. There are some things you've got to watch out for, though. Picking prime numbers is hard. You can't pick ones that are too small or too close together. There's a couple of other criteria on them. In order to make sure it's really safe. If they're too far apart, that has performance implications. So picking the right values is hard, which is again why we fall back on standards and key lengths that are recommended by like NIST. I think at the moment the current recommendation for RSA is 124-bit keys. It's going to go up. In fact, it's already been recommended to go up in the US to 2048 this year. So that they're having to up the prime numbers, because the problems with small prime numbers is that they're easy to crack. The problem with big prime numbers is they add more computation to your encryption and decryption. So how do we go about attacking RSA then? How can we crack it? Trial division is basically what you would do if you were in primary school and someone said, work out what the prime factors of this number are. So you know a prime number can't be the square of something. So the square root of whatever prime number you're trying to work out is the top limit you've got to check for, because above that, everything else is a square. So root n is the upper limit. So you go from 0 to root n, or say 128-bit. It's a big number to work out, but you could still do it by trial division, and you just keep trying every number one after another. And that has root n, big O over root n, obviously. Very, very brute force. Euler's algorithm, Fermat's algorithm, they work in similar ways. Basically, they start with the best guess. They work out roughly what the error is in moving any small direction, and the direction which has the smallest error, they move in, and then they repeat until they found a prime factor. So that you just keep iterating until you've got the best answer. Wheel factorization and quadratic sieves are a way of taking this whole big list of numbers and crossing them out. So you can, everything that ends in a 0, I can cross out because that's divisible by 10. Everything that ends in a 5, I can cross out, it's divisible by 5. Every even number I can cross. And you slowly filter, you sieve the numbers out. And this gives you a reduced set to check. This is expanded in the general number field sieve, which is currently the best algorithm we have for cracking prime numbers. It can do it in the order of e to the log n. So it's still huge numbers, but compared to root n, it's much smaller. Pollard's row algorithm is, again, it's another one of these ones where you start with a guess and you keep improving. What happens with Pollard's row algorithm, though, unlike Euler's and Fermat's, is that it actually starts forming a cycle. So the moment you realize you've got a number that you've already had before, you're done. And what happens is it draws this little shape like that, which actually looks just like a row. And that's why it's called Pollard's row algorithm. It's currently the most advanced algorithm we've got. It's slightly more practical to use than the general number field sieve, but it's not always the one that works in every case. So it's one of these ones where if people know what they're looking for, they'll use one, or they'll use the other if they don't. Shor's algorithm, I'm going to skip because I'm going to talk about it later, and it's a vastly different way of working. So that's how you attack the theory. You just get the raw numbers provided by people's public keys, and you just plug it into your own computer, and off you go. But like we said, that's resource intensive, both in computing time and everything like that. So a better way is actually just to hack the system. So you've all heard of man-in-the-middle attacks. This is where someone sits in between the sender and the recipient and modifies the message or spies on the message to try and find out enough information to decrypt it. Beast was about 3 years ago. It stands for Browser Exploit Against SSL and TLS. It uses a Java applet, which violates the same origin policy. Hey, love Java applets. And it works on cipher blocks rather than streams. It's fixed in TLS 1.1, but it's still broken in TLS 1.0, which a lot of systems default back to. So Beast is still a current attack vector. Crime and breach, they're pretty related. They both operate on the same way. In that they attack cookies and session data rather than trying to do a traditional man-in-the-middle. There is not a lot of known resistance against these at the moment. The best ones, especially for crime, is to have really good anti-CSRF technology in your web apps. You know, Spring Security provides some of this out of the box. I'm sure other frameworks do. Something to check into, because these are still live bugs that can cause problems. Live attacks, not bugs. Side channel attacks, what they do is that instead of trying to sit in the middle of the information flow, they try and listen at the box that the computation's going on. So they'll look at the registers if it can. It'll look at CPU information, memories things. It's trying to pull stuff out that isn't really part of the main flow, but it sort of flows over. This is also, you can be done with things like power. You can notice the difference in some operations by how much power the CPU is using, and that gives away information about what algorithm it's using, and that allows you to crack it. Lucky 13 is the one that's kind of been in the news recently. It's a padding attack. So you remember I said that if the message wasn't the right length, you needed to pad it out. Lucky 13 attacks that padding mechanism. And then, of course, Heartbleed, which we all know it's not a security attack. It's an attack that exploits a bug in OpenSSL. So that's RSA. We just need to cover a little bit more maths to do the elliptic curve stuff, and I will be quick and brief and hopefully, again, not make you cry. So we start with this idea of algebra. Most of us have done it at school, x plus y equals so-and-so, solve for x. That's not really algebra, that's algebraic equations. Algebra is about abstracting away. The way that in physics, instead of looking at particles and just looking at them as physical objects, they map them as mathematical objects, and then find out that these structures have got symmetry. So, for electrons, you've got 3 different weights, and then for muons, you've got the same 3 different weights, and neutrinos have got it's the symmetry in those systems. And this is what abstract algebra is about. It is possibly some of the most beautiful mathematics you will come across, if you're perverse that way, like I am. But of course, be warned, mathematicians, where we form little groups, we start using terms that only mean something in those groups, and in other groups, they mean the same terms. So when you are reading mathematical books and stuff, you might find some confusion, and you'll need to back up and just double check that the notation or the language isn't actually throwing you off. A classic example is this, A dot B, we just write AB, well, A times B, it's just AB, and that's fine if A and B are individual letters, but what if it was actually AB as one thing? You see what I mean? Sometimes the laziness catches you out. So the basic algebraic structure is a group, which is a set. A set, as you know, it's like in Java, it contains a sort of sequence of unique items. In our case, it's going to be numbers, obviously, of different types. And an operator, the dot operator. And they have these properties. We say a set is closed if take any 2 elements and times them together, and they give another item that's still in the set. So, if we've got the set of natural numbers from 0 to infinity, 2 times 2 is 4. That's inside the natural numbers, so it's closed. You can keep doing that all the way up. If you've got something with a modulo, obviously things start looping back around so that it hits the top number. Say if it's doing it modulo 10, then you go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it would just keep looping around like that. So then you still get this closed property. Associative is just the order in which you can do things. This classic, order operator of precedence stuff that we all love from Java because we can change it, like C++. You've got to have this identity element, 1 times anything by 1, and it's still the same thing. That's an identity element. And then an inverse, for us, obviously for natural numbers, is a minus. So 2 minus 2 plus 2 is 0. So that's the inverse for addition. The inverse for multiplication, obviously, you need to introduce fractions. So 3 times by a third is 1. Abelian groups builds on the last one simply by saying that we've got this extra property, which is that it doesn't matter if you do A times B or B times A. If this is numbers, that's great. If it's matrices, vectors, things like that, then order does start to come into play. And we build on top of this again, and we say that a ring is a group that has this extra binary operator. So we've got 1 addition, and we've got 1 for multiplication. And they just basically have to follow the same rules for a group. And you have these 2 operators, and they form what we call a ring. And if they happen to be commutative, A times B is B times C, then we call it a commutative ring. They're basically just building on every time. One thing builds on top of the other. And the reason why we do this is because you can prove stuff about a group, and it's then true for a ring, and all the really more advanced structures you build afterwards. And finally, a field. A field is, again, it's a group which has these 2 properties, and it also has this extra property where you can distribute addition over multiplication. So, A times B plus C is A times B plus A times C, or the other way around, depending on how you evaluate the brackets. And it's important to know that every ring is a field, but not every field is a ring. So, elliptic curves. If any of you have done any of this type of stuff at A-level or university, you forget about it. This is conic sections, not elliptic curves. An elliptic curve is defined over one of these fields that we've just mentioned. And it's done by this equation. It's quite simple. You could probably graph this by hand if you really wanted to. And what we have is this property called the discriminant. The discriminant is derived from the equation. And it gives you some characteristic properties about that equation. And by setting it to non-zero, we're basically fixing various points of this equation so that it crosses the x-axis and it has, one point rather than just touching it like a cusp and things like this. Properties that we're really after. And so we've got this set of numbers and we add a point at affinity and we call this EK. All right, I lied. The reality is that we use far more complex representations, but the one that I've just shown you is nice and simple, and so we're going to stick with that. You will see other versions in other bits of text on the internet. But again, we always consider the case where the discriminant equals 0. So we've got this elliptic curve now. We know some stuff about groups and fields. Let's put it all together with some meaningful stuff, real numbers. So ZP is the group of rational numbers modulo P. And we define the elliptic curve over that. So basically, you've got this fixed set of numbers, and the curve sits within that boundary. This is what one looks like. This is an elliptic curve. And we're just varying the parameters here. Now, I think what's really interesting is that just as it vanishes here, you'll see there's a little island that props up. So that it's not one continuous curve necessarily. You can have a circle with another bit off the side. They're quite complex shapes. So we know that we're talking about fields, so we need to know a way of implementing the addition operator that we talked about. So given 2 points on this curve, how do we add them together to produce a third point? So it breaks down into 3 cases, really. The first case is when P and Q aren't equal, and they don't draw a line parallel to the y-axis if you draw a line between them. The next case is when they are equal, and then the final case is when they like I said, they sit parallel to the x-axis. So we draw a line from P to Q, and we extend it until it hits the next part of the curve. And then you mirror it down, and that gives you your answer. And it's probably easier if I actually show you. So here's P and Q. We draw a line, and where it intersects, this is minus R. We mirror down to find R. And that's how we add that together. So this is case 1, where they form a nice line like that. What if P and Q are on the same point? Well, what we do then is we draw a tangent. Same rule, extend the tangent till it hits the curve again, mirror it down, and that's R. And finally, the weird case I was talking about, which is where they form a line. So what we do here is, remember I said there's a point at infinity? R equals infinity up there. So that's how we make sure that this set is closed. Any of the lines that don't end up projecting back on themselves point to infinity, which isn't our set of numbers, so the field is closed. So yeah, we just need to refresh. If you take any point, add it to infinity, it gives itself, it's the identity element. Add a point to its inverse, give you its infinity again. And then we've got associativity enclosed, which just give nice group properties. So that gives us addition. The other part of the field was the multiplication operator. So we define that by saying you just multiply any point by a number n. It's just the same as adding the point to itself n times. So 2p is p plus p, so on. So we now have set of points, an addition operator, a multiplication operator. It's closed, it's associative, representative. For both of them, it's got commutativity. So we've got a perfect field here. It's a nice mathematical structure. So how does elliptic curves use this? We either use a prime field, real numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or we use a binary field, booleans. The reason why we look at those two is hardware is much better at implementing binary ones. Prime ones are much better for software and for human understanding. And they're all working on this discrete logarithm problem, which is like the RSA problem, given two prime numbers times together, can you find the original two prime numbers? What we're saying here is, given some point times by itself so many times equals this, can you reverse it and find out what the number was you had to multiply it by to get? So it's a similar problem. You're trying to work out, basically, how to reverse this multiplication. And this is what we call the discrete elliptic curve logarithm problem. Again, just like RSA, we think it's in NP and co-NP, and we think it might be not NP complete or NP hard, which means that, again, at some point soon, we're going to have a computer system fast enough to crack it, even if it's just by brute force. The way we figure it is that we tweak some of the, RSA's got two inputs, the original two primes. Here we've got the number of primes that are the length of this field we're working on, ZP. We've got two initial starting points for the Weierstrass equation that we saw. We've got G, which is the initial point on the curve, which we start from every time when we're doing our calculations. And H, which is basically, it's this number which ensures that our curve is going to be able to encrypt all our data. H has to be big enough to encompass the alphabet, basically. So, generating keys, how do we do that? Pick a random number between 0 and the maximum size of our prime field, and generate a public key just by multiplying this number by the starting point of the curve, the G, the generator point. That's it. That's your public key generated. So how does someone use it? So we start by choosing another random number, and we calculate what's called a session key. This is a one-time key. And we also generate a secret. These two things. R is the encrypted message, which we send along with S together. And the reason why is because decrypting is this as simple as multiplying the message you've received R by your private number, integer that was picked randomly at the beginning. And that gives you a secret. And you then use that secret to decrypt your message. It's that simple. Again, it's a really nice, simple thing. And the reason why it works is this little expanded thing here. So, R is actually little r.g, and we substitute in again and again, and then you see S equals r.qa, which is the discrete logarithm problem, just formula again. So this shows you how nice and simple one falls out of the other using these abstract algebra frameworks. ECC security correlates strongly to which curves you've chosen, these initial points, and also small key sizes. Really small differences in parameters can make a vast difference to ECC, much more so than RSA. So how can we crack it? Again, brute force, a bit like trial division. It's slow, order of 2 to the n over 2. So, this grows massively fast as n increases. Baby step, giant step. You take a little step and you go, doesn't look good. Another little step, yeah, this is better. And you jump in a massive direction. And it's just this way of doing a small check your error, change, check your error, change. And you just continue to iterate until you've got back to the answer you want. Function field sieves are the algebraic field equivalent of the general number field sieve that we had for RSA. Again, Pollard's row algorithm, again, works exactly the same way, but it's adopted for the logarithm problem. And Shor's algorithm, again, adapted for logarithms, works in much the same way. It's by far the fastest algorithm we've got, Shor's algorithm, but it only runs on quantum computers at the moment. ECC, there are some side channel attacks. There are not many in the wild at the moment because it still hasn't had enough adoption for people to use it as a target. It's kind of like the days before Macintoshes started getting viruses. Then all the developers started using Macs, and suddenly you've got viruses for Macs. These attacks will appear. They use either side channel attacks and look for power differentials or how long it takes memory to cycle, or what's becoming slightly more common is smart cards with chips in them. You can poke bad data into them and see when they stop responding correctly, and that gives you information. So, there's a lot of opportunity for attack, but at the moment there are a great many deal of wild attacks for ECC. So how do they compare, RSA, ECC? ECC is not more secure than RSA, not by any stretch of the imagination. They are pretty much level pegging. They utilize similar mathematical problems, as we've seen. A discrete logarithm isn't that great a difference from the factorization problem, and this is shown by the fact that several of the algorithms have been adopted from one or the other. The fact that they're not NP-complete or NP-hard means that, like I said, the chances are someone could stumble across an algorithm which does this in polynomial time, and then the internet would be really broken. And as soon as quantum computers appear, really both these types are completely redundant. So, performance is better for shorter keys with ECC. We get the same level of security as we do with large number keys for RSA. So that allows the performance trade-off. ECC is stronger with smaller key sizes, and therefore it's quicker to calculate. And it's lower on CPU, which means it uses less battery. And therefore, it's great for mobile phones, and which is why Android are pushing for it to be one of the recommended default encryption mechanisms. And also processing the certificates is a little bit faster, just for a quirk of the mathematics. Another sort of interesting thing is that, unlike RSA, is that ECC allows the potential for three-party encryption. So, when you're doing a transaction between your bank and someone else, it allows you to set it up and leave it running, and then if you want to, you can invalidate just that trio binding without invalidating your entire private key. This is something that we're going to see a lot of activity on soon. There's a bit of mathematical complication to get out of the way, but that's what we're going to see soon for some of these more secure financial transactions. So, in the wild, what do we have? Usual ECC and Java stuff, JCA, you need to upgrade to get the high-performance security libraries if you haven't already. JCE, you need to make sure that you've got the right policies and profiles, and they're up to date. Otherwise, you can look at Legion of the Bounty Castle. They also have a good implementation around OpenSSL's implementation of ECC. A couple of the curves. There's this NIST curve, which is one of the most safe ones. As you can see, it's like the formula we saw before. It's a Weierstrass curve. And I've got this lovely long K number that it adds on the end. So, yeah, it's pretty much just a standard elliptic curve. It's one of the NIST ones, and it's relatively safe to use. There's one from the Standards for Efficient Cryptography group, which is unsafe to use. If you want to find out which curves are safe and which aren't, this link at the bottom, safecurves.crypto, will tell you all the information about all the standardized curves at the moment, including this one, which is the most popular one. It's really fast, it's really secure. Of all the ECC curves out there, it's one of the most secure curves for a variety of reasons. It's sort of to do with its mathematics. And there's a link here that will show you all the apps that currently support it. It's growing in length every day. But we've heard about this earlier. I mentioned that the NSA and NIST, there was a bit of mistrust earlier in the year about ECC and the NSA. What actually happened was that this dual ECC DBR thing, it's a secure random number generator. Basically, we're not entirely sure what they did to it. But there has been some modification that allows it to be less random than it should be, and hence, not having a random number generator not be random is kind of a big problem in a security algorithm. So shun that one, just ignore it. It doesn't invalidate all the other security in ECC, it's just that particular one. The Pirate Bay, using ECC now, they're using it soon for a darknet where your public key will be mapped to a DNS map. So no IPs will exist, so no one can block the Pirate Bay based on IP. This is another example of, push us harder to hide, and we'll hide where you can't find us. So they're using it for that. And this brings us up to the end. We have crypto refresh, which was a reminder about some of the terms and terminology. Difference between the public key and private key cryptography, symmetric, asymmetric. We touched on complexity about P versus NP and what problems mean and why we use problems that are in these groups and why it's important to know about these. We looked at RSA, how it worked. We looked at some abstract algebra, the mathematics of elliptic curves, and then exactly how they worked, ECC in the wild. So ECC is going to be the next protocol, the next type to use. RSA is still there. You should increase to 2048-bit length keys as soon as you can. 1024 is just about okay at the moment, but the recommendations are that you should upgrade to 2048. And because of that, ECC is growing popular because it needs smaller key sizes, it grows and it performs better. And at the moment, there aren't that many attacks on it. In the future, as I've said, ECC and RSA are going to be completely insecure because of the power of computing. What's next is likely to be lattice cryptography, which is based on another mathematical problem, but one we're pretty sure is NP complete. And that will raise the bar that extra level. Because at the moment, we know no algorithm, even on a quantum computer, that will run in polynomial time for an NP complete problem. And the other thing is we're going to see research into this new group of problems called NP intermediate, which are somewhere between NP complete and NP hard. Again, it's kind of mathematical curiosity at the moment, but do expect stuff to start coming out of this and back into cryptography. And I think that's it. So thank you. The slides will be up on my website soon, and of course, Parlay's in a couple of weeks. And if anyone's got any questions, then come and grab me afterwards in the corner of the room. Thank you.